This is being written a few short hours after my departure from the hell on earth that was Peekskill, New York, this Sunday before Labor Day, 1949. I still hear the frenzied roar of crowds, the patter of stone against glass and flesh. I hear the wails of women, the impassioned screams of children, the jeers and taunts of wild-eyed youths. I still smell the sickening odor of blood flowing from freshly opened wounds, gasoline fumes from autos and buses valiantly trying to carry their loads of human targets out of the range of bricks, bottles, stones, sticks. I still feel the violence, the chaos which permeated the air. I still hear, smell, and feel Peekskill.
Did my Lord deliver Daniel, deliver Daniel, deliver Daniel? Did my Lord deliver Daniel, and why not every man? He delivered Daniel from the lion's den, Jonah from the belly of the whale, and the Hebrew children from the fiery furnace, and why not every man? Did my Lord deliver Daniel, deliver Daniel, deliver Daniel? Did my Lord deliver Daniel, and why not every man? The moon runs down in a purple stream, the sun refused to shine. Every star did disappear, yes, freedom shall be mine. Did my Lord deliver Daniel, deliver Daniel, deliver Daniel? Did my Lord deliver Daniel, and why not every man? Did my Lord deliver Daniel, deliver Daniel, deliver Daniel? Did my Lord deliver Daniel, and why not every man?
On September 4th, 1949, a concert was held outside the small city of Peekskill, New York, headlined by singer, actor, and activist Paul Robeson. Roughly 20 to 30,000 people from the nearby summer communities of Westchester, as well as from New York City, were in attendance. In response, many of the local citizens of the Peekskill area engaged in barbaric acts of violence and hatred towards those who attended the concert. Trapping them along the narrow country roads, the rioters began hurling rocks, bottles, and other objects at the fleeing cars and buses. Traffic was brought to a halt as passengers and drivers fled or were pulled from their vehicles and beaten. Men, women, and children were caught in the frenzy of a years-old bitter hatred that had finally risen to the surface.
A similar concert was supposed to be held a week prior on August 27th, but it was protested by local veterans groups and other citizens of the towns of Peekskill, Cortlandt, and Putnam Valley, who vowed to stop Paul Robeson from performing at all costs. Countless innocent concertgoers were injured as a result of the simmering anger. After the concert was prevented from happening, a second one was held on September 4th. But this story begins long before the summer of 1949. The headlining performer, Paul Robeson, had built a career on being a remarkable actor and a talented singer, focusing his efforts on the fight for the rights of African Americans as well as working-class citizens around the world. As a result of being an outspoken critic of America's treatment of both groups, Robeson was being blacklisted in the public eye by the time he performed in Peekskill. Once hailed as one of the greatest American celebrities, he was now branded a traitor and a subversive agent for the Soviet Union for his alleged membership in the Communist Party. The validity of these claims, however, was irrelevant. Veterans in Peekskill, as well as many citizens across the nation, were enraged, fueled by the anti-communist propaganda that prevailed during the late 1940s. It was in Peekskill where verbal rhetoric turned into physical aggression, and the followers and supporters of Paul Robeson's progressive campaign of activism would endure the racial and anti-Semitic abuse of a region where prejudice had existed for over half a century.
Roughly 50 years before the infamous events of 1949, the strong African-American community surrounding the Witherspoon Presbyterian Church of Princeton, New Jersey, would welcome a new member into their congregation. On April 9, 1898, Paul Leroy Robeson was born.
The youngest of 8 children, Paul Leroy Robeson was born and raised in this house on Witherspoon Street. His father, William, had escaped slavery in 1860 at the age of 15. Serving as a laborer for the Union Army during the Civil War, he eventually obtained an education in ministerial studies at Lincoln University near Philadelphia. There he met Maria Bastille. Maria and William fell in love and were married in 1878. When Paul was born nearly 20 years later, the town of Princeton had a reputation for continuing a centuries-old tradition for being the northernmost outpost of the Confederacy, having been and continuing to be a cultural safe haven for Southern aristocrats long after the end of the Civil War. Hostility towards African Americans was commonplace. Friends of Paul recall instances of white children chasing after them, bullying and taunting them as they walked to and from school. Despite the bitterness that surrounded him, Paul remained a kind and admired member of the community, who was known for his sweetness and modesty, as well as his warm and wholesome qualities towards most everyone he encountered. This would remain consistent throughout his life as the genuine characteristics of the man he was destined to become. And it all happened here, in the Witherspoon-Jackson neighborhood of Princeton, New Jersey. Paul would recount many years later that African Americans lived a much more communal life in the neighborhood of Princeton than those who lived in other areas of town. This was because the community here was expressed and preserved in the Witherspoon Street Presbyterian Church, which offered a place of safety and comfort to the Black residents of Princeton. To this day, the church still stands on the same block as Paul's childhood home.
Reverend William Robeson was a respected leader in the community and had led the congregation for nearly 20 years. Described as ever the defender of justice for his tireless effort to promote and preserve the civil rights of Black citizens in his community, he was unwilling to compromise on moral principles, even if it meant economic harm. This would unfortunately be realized when in 1901 he was forced out of his Princeton pastorate. While the exact circumstances regarding this decision are still debated, later testimony from colleagues of William claimed that he had refused to bow down to pressure from certain white residents of Princeton who demanded he stop speaking out against social injustice. Despite the entirety of the Witherspoon Church protesting this decision, Reverend Robeson was forced to step down. The family moved to Somerville, New Jersey, enabling Paul to attend high school, where William expected Paul to maintain a perfect academic record. Paul quickly excelled in nearly every subject. His discipline and work ethic was recognized by his peers, white and Black. His father also took notice of Paul's passion for performance and oration. He would help him develop these skills in lengthy exercises, having Paul memorize speeches and passages for his father's judgment.
As an African, one of Africa, you ever heard some of the great African orators? And my father was in that tradition. Every Sunday morning, it would be a rolling out of a great sermon, and now we bow down on bended knee, oh Lord. And it became like an opera almost. And so some of the speeches of Othello, arise, black vengeance, from thy hollow cell, yield up, O love, thy crown and hearted throne to tyranny, swell Oh, yes, it could be done, but Mr. Richardson said, now, Paul, now, wait a minute now. Just get some truth here. Don't quite roll it out so much.
Well, on the question of Mr. Richardson...
Paul Robeson was also an extremely gifted athlete, playing on the school's football, basketball, baseball, and track teams. On many occasions, he was noted for bringing his school's team to victory. His outstanding performance in sports attracted attention from several schools, whose coaches wanted him on their teams, so long as the school was willing to enroll him. Many schools, such as Princeton University, would not enroll black students until shortly before the Second World War. Paul's father wanted him to attend Lincoln University, as he had many years before. But in 1915, Paul was awarded a full scholarship to one of the most prestigious colleges in the nation, Rutgers University. He was the third black student to have ever attended the school. But from the moment he first stepped foot on campus, he was aware that his race made him a target for other students.
So I come to the school, and some of the other players are much older than I. And I'm a Negro, and they don't want a Negro on the team. And so one day I'm out on the field, and before you know it, one fella hits me in the nose, and my nose is bleeding and bloody. And another fella breaks my shoulder. And then I was on the ground, and a fella steps on me like that. And I'm completely bloody. And the man steps on my fingers and takes my nails off of my hand, and they're bleeding. And I become absolutely out of my mind. Sumashitsi. And the man comes by, and I'm about to tackle him, and I take him, and I'm gonna, as far as I'm concerned, I'm gonna kill him. They knew forever that if they ever touched me, ever touched this Negro, that would be their lives. No more trouble from then on. I made the team.
Paul understood that as admired as he was, he would never be considered a true member of the community. Accomplishment could win respect and applause, but not full acceptance. He never went to any parties or dances after school because there was always the feeling that something unpleasant might happen. His talents were what made him a target for his entire life, but in his father's eyes, it was through his talents that Paul could change the world. William embedded in his son the importance of defending his principles, to stand up for what he believed in, no matter the price or consequence. He saw Paul's potential to create precedents for future generations of African Americans. His father would remind him that when he was out on a football field or in a classroom or anywhere else, he was not there on his own. Paul was the representative of every black man and woman who wanted to go to college and wanted to play football, but couldn't. And as their representative, according to William, Paul had to show that he could take whatever was handed out.
Standing at 6'3", he hardly resembled the adored, awkward teenager he was back in Somerville. This would aid Robeson in leading his team to victory game after game, proving to be an unstoppable force on the field. In 1917, Rutgers played against the undefeated Newport Naval Reserve at Ebbets Field in Brooklyn. The New York Tribune declared Robeson to be a veritable Othello of battle in leading his team to a 14-0 victory over the formerly undefeated Newport team. His outstanding sportsmanship would lead to his designation on the All-American football team in 1917 and 1918. He was the first student from Rutgers to earn this prestigious position. In addition to his excellent performance on the field, Paul Robeson was an extraordinary student and scholar. His grade point average was so high in his junior year that he was elected to Phi Beta Kappa, the nation's oldest academic honor society. In his free time, Paul studied foreign languages, becoming fluent in as many as 11 languages in extraordinarily short amounts of time. He won many prizes and awards for his speeches and writings, drawing in the admiration of his peers and leading to his selection as valedictorian of his graduating class. But shortly before his graduation, tragedy would strike, when William Robeson would pass away.
Paul was devastated. The man who had guided him
and built the foundation for who he was to be, was gone. William Robeson prepared his son to not just survive in this world, but to thrive in it. And now, Paul was alone, physically. He would carry his father's spirit with him for the remainder of his life, always striving to be a better speaker, student, and leader in the fight to preserve the equality of all people. And all of the lessons, guidance, and development that Paul had undergone with his father was in preparation for this moment when he stepped onto the stage at his graduation and read a speech.
We of the younger generation especially must feel a sacred call to that which lies before us. I go out to do my little part in helping my untutored brother. We of this less favored race realize that our future lies chiefly in our own hands. On ourselves alone will depend the preservation of our liberties and the transmission of them in their integrity to those who will come after us. But may I not appeal to you to join with us in continuing to fight, until in all sections of this fair land will there be equal opportunities for all, and character shall be the standard of excellence, and black and white shall clasp friendly hands in the consciousness of the fact that we are brethren, and that God is the Father of us all.
Up north in Harlem, African-American culture was flourishing. Working in every conceivable profession, business, and trade, blacks were able to live comfortably and look after themselves without fear of repression. Writers and intellectuals such as Langston Hughes, Jesse Redmond Fawcett, W.E.B. Du Bois, Claude McKay, and Countee Cullen, among others, created works that combated racial stereotypes by presenting truer representations of black life and identity in the United States. Musicians such as Ethel Waters, Duke Ellington, Fats Waller, and Louis Armstrong, among others, were taking the earliest forms of jazz from New Orleans and expanding upon it in the skillful, competitive, and communal environment of New York. This new birth of freedom, safety, and creativity drew thousands of black people from the rural South who looked to escape the grinding poverty, social segregation, and racial violence that thrived in those regions of the country. Paul Robeson would move to Harlem and enter Columbia Law School in 1920, feeling that law was the best vehicle to channel his talents and help uplift the black race. Having come from the majority white background of New Jersey, Paul quickly fell in love with the vibrant culture that Harlem had to offer. It would also be here in Harlem where Paul would meet Islanda Good, known by friends as Essie, at one of the various social gatherings in Harlem.
Essie worked at New York Presbyterian Hospital and had obtained a Bachelor of Science degree from Columbia University. Friends around them acknowledged that they were different in many ways, with Paul being the more artistic one, whereas Essie was more practical and scientific in nature. But these differences, while not without their difficulty, were regarded as complementary. As Paul worked to achieve his law degree, Essie was always by his side, spending long evenings together discussing the cases he was studying. And fairly soon they would fall in love. Paul would eventually propose to her on the morning of August 17th, 1921, and before the day ended, they would be pronounced husband and wife.
Some enchanted evening, you may see a stranger, you may see a stranger across a crowded room, and somehow you know even then that somewhere you'll see her again and again.
Essie encouraged Paul to further explore his acting skills. He performed at smaller shows at the YMCA in Harlem to satisfy his artistic desires, under the condition that he could continue his law studies simultaneously. But Essie was determined to help him jumpstart a career in performing.
Paul graduated from Columbia Law School in 1922 and quickly found work with a socially prominent lawyer who knew Paul from Rutgers. It gave Paul an opportunity to practice law at a respectable firm. Few black lawyers had ever been given such an opportunity, and Paul enjoyed the work. His co-workers noted that his arguments and briefs were excellent for anyone fresh out of law school. However, after a few months, the clerks and other members of the firm had made it clear that they were unwilling to work alongside a black man. Seeing that there would be no end to the degradation and racial insults that were thrown his way, Paul felt forced to withdraw. And now, he was at a crossroads. Having lost this rare opportunity, he could have gone back to square one, or he could take a chance on an offer from the Provincetown Players, a theater group who were attracting attention for their production of Eugene O'Neill's The Emperor Jones. Before the play's first run, the role of the protagonist was initially offered to Robeson, though he declined it in favor of pursuing law. But now it was being offered to him again. Considering his options, Paul, with strong encouragement and support from Essie, chose to pursue a career as an actor.
The Emperor Jones opened to critical acclaim. At every performance, when the curtain fell, the audience would rise to their feet and applaud. One critic recounted how when the ache in their arms stopped their hands, they used their voices to continue the ovation for Robeson's superb acting as the tyrannical and tragic Emperor Jones. Many years later, members of the Provincetown Players would recount how they could still remember his incredible personality, impressive physical build, and graceful movement on stage, long before they recognized they had caught lightning in a bottle. In addition to being a significant jumpstart to his theatrical career, one notable moment in the production of The Emperor Jones would open another avenue in Paul's career.
Yes, back to the jail. What a boy. Where are you hiding? If you don't come, I'm going to tell your mammy. Water me from the lime rock branch, water I cannot drink. You jackal.
His strong baritone voice struck the audience like thunder. Up until this point, he never once considered himself to be a singer. But with strong encouragement from his friends at the Provincetown Theater and his wife Essie, Paul would begin performing Afro-American spirituals and folk music. Not long after, he was booked for concert tours across America. Essie quit her job at New York Presbyterian to be Paul's full-time manager. The pair were fully committed, and the sky was the limit for the young Paul Robeson. His talents as a singer were recognized by many, including up-and-coming songwriters Jerome Kern and Oscar Hammerstein II, who would cast him for their musical, Showboat. Set on and around the Mississippi River, the musical follows the lives of performers, stagehands, and dock workers on a showboat called the Cotton Blossom. Paul's character is best remembered for his performance of the song Old Man River, written by Kern and Hammerstein specifically for Robeson.
Old Man River, that old man River, he must know something, but don't say nothing. He just keeps rolling, he keeps on rolling along.
Showboat was a runaway success when it premiered, and was recognized for its revolutionary storytelling. It is widely regarded as the first modern Broadway musical, and it would be Old Man River, which would become its most enduring number.
Keeps rolling along.
By this point in his career, Paul was a critically acclaimed actor and singer who was now starting a successful career in film. In addition, Paul and Essie welcomed a baby boy into the world, who they named Paul Robeson Jr. Many in his position would be more than satisfied to accept this as their peak, but Paul felt he could do more, much more. His performance of the 1933 film adaptation of The Emperor Jones was a significant milestone since it was the first motion picture to feature an African American in a starring role. This would not happen again for more than 20 years.
Well, I reckon overplays my hand this once. Man can't take the pot on a bobtail flush all the time. Was I saying I'd sit in 6 months more? Well, I changed my mind then. I cashes in and resigns the job of emperor right this minute.
Well, blimey, you're a cool bird and no mistake.
No use fussing. When I knows the game's up, I kisses it goodbye without no long wait.
Black commentators in newspapers such as the Philadelphia Tribune, while complimentary toward Robeson's skills as an actor, criticized the story and direction of the film, which they felt helped to form the negative view most whites had of blacks.
What's that other queer clickety sound I hear? Sound like some nigga was shooting crap. Time I beat it quick when I get them notes. Who there? Who that? Is that you, Jeff? Jeff. I'm sure mighty glad to see you. They told me you done died from that cut I gives you. How you come to be here, nigga? Ain't you going look up? Can't you speak to me? Is you a hand? Nigga, I killed you dead once. Has I got to kill you again? You take it then! He's gone anyway. Head or no head, that shot fix him.
Understandably, Robeson was conflicted. He was a trailblazer, achieving things no other black man or woman had ever achieved in America before. However, he couldn't help but feel that he could be doing more to better represent his race. During this time, he also began to feel a strong desire to return to his academic roots and study elements of the greater world.
How is it that the American Negro, who for so long has been a second-class citizen in the United States...
Still is, I'm sorry.
Well, how is it that he's contributed so much to American culture?
Well...
Music, dance, everything you can think of.
Well, I have to be very modest about that. I would say certainly as we look at the African peoples in Nigeria, for example, I just got a wonderful invitation to go to Nigeria to be present at the installation at the Governor General Ezekwe, an old friend, who will now, and I had to cable him. I'm in Australia. I certainly would like to be with you, but I'm out here with some good folks. But I'll get to Nigeria later.
Mr. Robeson, do you feel that Africa is to some extent an affinity for it, a home, or do you still feel America is essentially your home? How do you feel?
Well, let me come here. I'll come to that in just a second. But to come back to it, so I would say the Africans and the American Negroes have turned out to be an extraordinarily gifted people. The great tragedy is that by not making us full-class citizens as yet in America, they may be losing, I don't know how much yet. That's all. And to come back, I would say that unquestionably, I am an American, born there. My father slaved there. Upon the backs of my people was developed the primary wealth of America, the primary wealth. You have to have accumulated wealth to start, to build. You did it another way here in Australia. You had to build your accumulated wealth too. You just came and took it, you know what I mean? And that's what they did in most of the countries. That's what you Europeans did. You just took it. We got to catch up with you a little bit. And so in America. So
There's a lot of America that belongs to me yet, you understand? But just like a Scottish American is proud of being from Scotland, I'm proud for being African. Now, in our school books, they tried to tell me that all Africans were savages, till I got to London and found most of the Africans I knew were going to Oxford and Cambridge and doing very well, and learned their culture. And even once somebody had the temerity, after one had conquered the Chinese people and imposed upon them the opium trade and everything else, to suggest that they were a backward people, just the people who had been civilized so long over the rest of you folks didn't make any sense at all. So somewhere, it was wonderful to find about the colored peoples of the world that they were very advanced. So I would say today that I'm an American who is infinitely prouder to be of African descent, no question about it. No question about it. I'm an Afro-American, and I don't use the word American ever loosely again.
Now, this was the feeling. This was the feeling.
Nations around the world invited him to perform, which he took as an opportunity to continue his study of foreign cultures. One such invitation, from the Russian film director Sergei Eisenstein in 1934, would result in his first visit to the Soviet Union. This trip, in its entirety, would change the course of his life. Traveling by train through Europe with Essie and British biographer Maurice Seton, their route required them to switch trains in Berlin during Adolf Hitler's rise to power. Arriving at the station, German locals immediately took notice of Paul, who was darker skinned than Essie. When Essie left Marie and Paul briefly to look after their luggage, a German woman saw Paul standing beside Marie, a white woman, and reported him to 3 Nazi guards on the platform. Paul recalled the unforgettable hatred in their eyes as they surrounded him, and the racial epithets the soldiers snarled at him. Miraculously, their train arrived just in time, and as they boarded, they couldn't shake the feeling of wolves waiting to spring. Leaving Berlin, Paul sat hunched in the corner of the train compartment, staring out into the darkness.
When they arrived in Moscow, they were greeted by an entirely different reception. Sergei Eisenstein, along with a crowd of enthusiastic fans and admirers of Paul, greeted the Robesons at the train station, and they were invited to operas, plays, and film screenings as a glimpse of what the culture of the Soviet Union could offer. What immediately stood out to Paul, though, was how differently he and other black people were treated in Russia compared to the United States.
How much time have you spent in Russia?
I was there for over a period, let's say between 34 and 37. I was there 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 3 months. What is much more interesting, I should think, Senator, is that my boy went to school there for 2 or 3 years. My one boy.
Your boy?
Because I found in Russia a complete absence of race prejudice.
Yeah.
A complete absence.
What's the name?
The first time in my life, Senator, that I was able to walk the earth with complete dignity as a human being.
Paul would return from the Soviet Union a changed man. Having seen a nation where he believed racial prejudice was non-existent and the working class was not under the oppression of the elite, contrasted with a nation he believed represented all the evils of segregation, Paul realized he needed to redirect the course of his life toward activism.
Today, the artist cannot hold himself aloof. Through the destruction in certain countries of the greatest of man's cultural heritage, through the propagation of false ideas of racial and national superiority, the scientist, the writer, the artist is challenged. The challenge must be taken up. For this culture, a legacy from our predecessors, is the foundation upon which we build a higher and all-embracing culture. It belongs not only to us, not only to the present generation, it belongs to our posterity and must be courageously defended. The forces of reaction have made no distinction between combatants and non-combatants. The beautiful village of Guernica, nestled in the Basque hills, with its blood-soaked streets, is proof of that. These victims must be given every possible aid. This common humanity demands.
The threat of fascism began to loom over the rest of Europe in the latter half of the 1930s, particularly in Spain. Paul began performing songs for audiences in Spain to support the fight against the fascist forces attempting to overthrow the Spanish Republic. He sang for wounded soldiers and even visited the battlefront to provide a boost in morale, as victory against the fascists was becoming doubtful. Shortly after the defeat and collapse of the Spanish Republic, more news from Europe would shock the world.
This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
The outbreak of the Second World War terrified millions around the world. Even in America, which was still in an isolationist slumber, people knew it was only a matter of time until they would be dragged into the conflict. When the United States entered the war in December of 1941, Paul inserted himself at the forefront of the war effort, alongside many other prominent artists and celebrities.
Now hold on here. What are you trying to give us?
Are you an American?
Am I an American? I'm just an Irish, Negro, Jewish, Italian, French and English, Spanish, Russian, Chinese, Polish, Scotch, Hungarian, Litvak, Swedish, Finnish, Canadian, Greek and Turk and Czech and double Czech American.
You sure are something.
Our country's strong, our country's young, and her greatest songs are still unsung. From her plains and mountains we have sprung to keep the faith with those who went before. Deep as our valleys, high as our mountains, strong as the people who made it. For I have always believed it, and I believe it now.
Expanding his repertoire to include the folk music of other nations, the works of the resistance groups combating Nazi occupation in Europe, as well as songs from the American and Welsh labor movements, Paul considered his careers in music and activism to be one and the same. He performed and recorded songs with the lyrics in their original languages as a sign of respect, as well as a symbol of international solidarity. Paul Robeson devoted himself to being a citizen of the world at a time when the world seemed irrevocably divided.
Das Lied gesungen mit Nagames in die Hände.
His commitment to the labor force in particular was important to him, as he felt the working class to be an internationally oppressed group, whom he empathized with as a black man. Participating in picket lines and protests alongside unions throughout the United States, Paul was filled with a burning desire to see black and white workers unified, as he felt this was the only way for union movements to succeed. He would take the stories and anecdotes of the often misrepresented working class to the silver screen, in the motion picture, The Proud Valley, shedding light on the trials and tribulations of the coal miners of Wales.
Stop grousing. We've got to be going soon down to the labor exchange.
Aye, and you better get a move on, Nick, or you won't get back in time to sign on.
That flaming labor exchange.
It's a good job we've got it. Better dole money than no money at all.
This awful loaf's better than none talk. Makes me sick.
Nearly a year since the explosion. And we've been no more than numbers on the books of a labor exchange.
There's a lot of flaming convicts.
Keep working and forget it.
All this work. Burrowing like rabbits, day after day, just to get enough coal to keep the kettle boiling.
You like your cup of tea, don't you, Nick?
Enough to drive a job daft. Here we are, strutting for a few bits of sluggy coal, whilst down blindy pits, there's millions of tons of best Welsh coal waiting to be worked.
What I want to know is, why can't we get to the coal face through the sealed section?
Because it's chock full of gas, I expect.
If only they'd let us have a shot at it.
You may get your chance yet, Nick.
Still got faith in that letter, have you? You are daft if you think the owners will take any notice of that. You and your letters.
The last letter Emlyn sent was signed by the Miners' Federation, the Chamber of Trade.
Aye, and Uncle Tom Cobley and all.
We'll get an answer from London yet.
If we do, it'll be as they says in Parliament, in the negative.
Ah, forget it, Nick. Come on, let's get going.
Go on. Settle it down with this side.
Soon after, Paul was given the opportunity of a lifetime to portray Othello on Broadway. This would be regarded as the crowning achievement of his acting career.
And say besides that in Aleppo once, where a malignant and a turbaned Turk beat a Venetian and traduced the state, I took by the throat the circumcised dog and smote him thus. Oh, bloody period!
All that spoke Maud.
I kissed thee ere I killed thee. No way but this. Killing myself to die upon a kiss.
Breaking all Broadway records for Shakespearean productions, Robeson's Othello was hailed as one of the most memorable events in the history of theater. Critics praised the production and declared Paul's performance as unquestionably the finest portrayal of Shakespeare's Othello in this generation. Drawing on the African traditions that Paul had studied for years, he was able to portray Othello as an African of the highest nobility, rather than previous interpretations, often played by white men in blackface.
Does playing Othello mean something more to you, merely than playing a part in Shakespeare?
I should say so. Somewhere it seems to me that Shakespeare, the genius that he was, seemed to foreshadow and understand many of the problems that have since arisen in our world, perhaps were present then. First, I would say that here is a part which has dignity for the Negro actor. Often we don't get those opportunities. And I would say that my people will be very proud of my or any other Negro actor appearing in such a part. I think also that to me Othello is one of a different culture. Shakespeare insists that he's African. Some argument whether the word black and the fact that he's from Africa is very clear to me. And that Shakespeare posed this problem of a, say, black man in a white society in the role that he's playing. And Shakespeare gave Othello such dignity. He killed not from, as he said, not from hate, but from honor, from a sense of his own human dignity. And to my mind, there could be no greater character to play than one like that.
Paul had turned Othello from a Shakespearean classic reserved for the elite to a social statement that could be enjoyed and viewed by all. He would win the Medal for Good Diction on the stage in 1944 and the first annual Donaldson Award, equivalent to today's Tony Award, for Outstanding Lead Performance. As the Second World War came to an end, Robeson was viewed by millions with admiration and respect. His efforts to support America in the war against Nazi Germany, his efforts to empathize and stand with the working class of nations around the world,
and his fantastic portrayal of Othello catapulted him into international stardom. In many places, he was hailed as one of the most recognizable and greatest American celebrities. Yet even in this triumphant moment, forces deep within the government were watching him, considering him to be a threat to the fabric of American society. Paul, along with many other activists and critics of the current state of the nation, were being monitored for suspicion of subversive activities against the United States. As the Iron Curtain began to split Europe in 1945, an indelible line would also be drawn in America between us and them.
I dreamed I saw Joey Hill last night, alive as you and me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, says he. I never died, says he. In Salt Lake City, Joe, says I, am standing by my bed. They framed you on a murder charge, says Joe, but I ain't dead. Says Joe, but I ain't dead. The copper bosses killed you, Joe. They shot you, Joe, says I. Takes more than guns to kill a man, says Joe, I didn't die. Says Joe, I didn't die. And standing there as big as life and smiling with his eyes, says Joe, what they can never kill went on to organize. Went on to organize. Joey Hill ain't dead, he says to me. Joey Hill ain't never died. Where working men defend their rights, Joey Hill is at their side. Joey Hill is at their side. I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you and me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, says he. I never died, says he. Says